Outriders. What a game. And it is a game that caught me by surprise, which is weird because I do love sci-fi, I do love collecting legendary items, and I do love being a powerful badass. And this game has all that, but why did it take so long for me to give this game a try? After all, it is 2025 now, and this game was released back in 2021. Well, I think it has a lot to do with me having been an avid Destiny player for a long while, and so amongst the Destiny community, whenever a new sci-fi looter shooter comes out, the majority of the community would call it a Destiny clone and make fun of it, while some would call it the next Destiny killer and be hopeful for a new king of looter shooter. I think at this point in time, it is no secret to anyone that knows anything about gaming that the Destiny community is not always the nicest of the gaming communities. That's not to say there are no nice people in there are, but it is undeniable that some of the players can be very toxic people. And I know this from experience. After all, I was in a very active clan for several years, running raids back to back daily. In some instances, I was even the toxic player, and that's not something I'm proud of for the most part. But it is no secret that during those years in which Destiny 2 has been active, there have been several looter shooters that were coined the next Destiny killer. But let's be honest here, none of them really made a dent, at least not long-lasting ones. And looking back, that wasn't always due to a lack of merit in the game's part, but a lot of the Destiny community would spread hateful opinions about such games just for the sake of putting them down, or perhaps even in hopes to keep other Destiny players from leaving Destiny to try those other games. And a lot of the games were victims to this, and I think Outriders was, to a certain extent, also affected by this, because in my memories and of those close to me that were part of the same clan, all remember hearing that Outriders was a terrible game, a subpar attempt at a looter shooter. And I know it might sound weird to hear about a potentially cool game but not look into it on our own and just take what we hear from other people as true and factual. But you gotta remember, we lived and breathed Destiny, and these clanmates were nerds with whom we had played so frequently and for so long that not only did we trust each other, but we grew attuned to one another. We knew each other's tempo in the way they would shoot guns. We knew their loadouts. We knew how they would react in certain situations without the need of verbal communication. We fully trusted them to hold out their end of the raid, and fully trusted them that they would have our back in the crucible. Cover fire was second nature. Bait and switch was a natural reaction with them. So yeah, when one of them told us that a new game was really bad, we believed them, never questioning where they had heard it from, just like they never questioned the person they heard that from, and so on. But the Destiny community wasn't the only factor in this, of course. Like most Square Enix games, aside from the Final Fantasy games, this game was a victim of weak marketing. The very first time I saw the trailer for the base game was when I was looking for the trailer to make this video. The only time I came across anything about this game naturally in the wild was when World Slayer came out and there was an ad for it playing on Twitch while I was trying to get some Twitch drops for PUBG. And when I saw it, I was like, bro, that doesn't look half bad. So I asked some of my clanmates and they were like, yeah, but remember everybody said that this was bad? Surely they played it before saying something like that. And in retrospect, they probably didn't, but we were all like, yeah, probably. It wasn't until much later when I finally decided to play the game, when I was looking for something different from Fallout 76, that I realized this game is actually pretty fun and cool. So I looked at the Steam ratings, and to my surprise, they were for the most part positive. Now it looks like it's mixed, but I promise you it was positive back when I checked. In fact, if you look at the graph here, for the most part, it has stayed more positive than negative. So then why was no one playing it now? Well, before we get into that, let's talk about the actual game itself. After all, this is supposed to be a game review. The story here is at least pretty interesting. To keep things brief, so that this video isn't too long, the Earth was made inhospitable. Humanity made 2 ships to go check out a planet called Enoch, which they believed was a good option of a planet to colonize. One of the ships got destroyed even before leaving, and the last ship makes it to the planet's orbit in about 80 years. The Outriders were sent down first to survey the planet to make sure everything is okay for the civilians in Cryo that are still in orbit to start coming down a couple thousand at a time, for a slow and steady transition and progressive and orderly infrastructure. And everything did seem fine until the Outriders came across a signal from somewhere in the planet. So they decide to go find this signal, but instead come across the anomaly, which is a storm that disintegrates living things, including humans. So the Outriders are caught in the anomaly, many disintegrate, including your character, but you somehow come back. Confused but in survival mode, the Outriders try to make it back to base camp to hail their ship in the orbit to tell them not to come down as the planet is not safe. But once in the camp, they are attacked by their government officer as he believes this really is humanity's last chance and that they have to come down no matter what and face and conquer whatever dangers this planet may have. So the Outriders are being exterminated in order to keep the anomaly a secret, but you survive the initial assault and you are able to keep the civilians from coming down. But in the process, you get hurt. Your companions decide to freeze you in cryo, promising to come back. But you soon wake up to a war zone, finding out that it has been over 30 years since you were put in cryo and that the anomaly only got worse, keeping humanity confined in a single valley where they began to fight each other for the little bit of resources they had left. Not only so, but whatever the anomaly did, the people who were brought back after disintegrating came back with powers. So it is up to you to find the source of that signal from 30 years ago, to find out more about the anomaly, and to hope that you can now hail the ship to send more supplies for humanity to be able to survive. And I know the way I put it sounds somewhat generic, but this has got to be one of my favorite openings on any sci-fi game, definitely on the top 10 at least. Not to mention, there are several plot twists that caught me off guard during the game, and it's just overall a fun and epic story. As for the gameplay, People Can Fly have made Gears of War and Bulletstorm before this, so it is unsurprising that the gunplay does feel satisfying, but at the same time the movement feels a little bit heavy. Another very noticeable missing mechanism in this game is the lack of the jump button. You're not allowed to jump, and I mean, how many Square Enix games allow you to jump, yeah? It shouldn't be a big problem on paper, but as a looter shooter, it is definitely a little weird that you can't jump. Of course, this is the first looter shooter for both People Can Fly and Square Enix as far as I know. Maybe if they kept working on the game, they would have eventually got all the mechanisms right, but the lack of jumping definitely makes the game feel a little less thought through than say something like Destiny. And seeing this very detailed map, which seems like you could just get over the edge by jumping but not being able to, makes the game feel a little cheap, to be honest. But this is only regarding movement, because if you look at the skills, not only are there 4 different classes here, but the skill tree is a lot more complex than Destiny ever was, which allows for more personalized and vastly different builds in this game as compared to Destiny's just changing the exotic that you're going to use and the type of grenade that you throw. Especially if you take into account how many different kinds of passive perks there are that you can get for your equipment. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised, as Square Enix standard for RPGs was always pretty high. Speaking of high standards, the aesthetics in this game is superb. That's not to say the aesthetics in other looter shooters were bad, I just mean Outriders can definitely go toe to toe with some of the more graphically beautiful games. There are several different regions with their own biomes and each give off a very different vibe, and it's just beautiful. I often found myself pausing a moment to look at the scenery and appreciate the details in the environment, or a piece of armor, or a weapon. Speaking of armor and weapons, the loot that you get and the enemies that you face will scale in level according to your world tier if you're still in the base game, which does become Apocalypse tier after you beat the base game. All that is your level plus however many levels they scale the enemies to. You can change the tiers at will to adjust the difficulty, but only the latest tier will give you any experience. Another interesting aspect is that you can replay any of the missions again in any world/Apocalypse tier that you can get to. Even the endgame activities can be played at Apocalypse tier 1, which is much lower than the tier you would have when you got to them, but the rewards will be scaled to that and hence not be of much use for someone who has reached the endgame. There is of course a way to improve lower level gear, but unlike in most looter shooter games, this alternative is costly and goes up 1 level at a time instead of matching the power level, making it more viable to just scrapping the low level item instead of upgrading it to the point where it will be usable. Speaking of difficulty and builds, the base game campaign is quite easy. I never felt the need to bring down my world tier. I immediately increased the world tier the moment they were available, and I never really felt the need to tweak my half-assed build to get through the entirety of the base game campaign, even though I was playing solo the whole time. But once I got to World Slayer campaign, things got very difficult very fast, and I assume this is because World Slayer came out a year and 2 months after the base game, so the devs probably expected players to have played the endgame expeditions and gotten a bunch of legendary gear, and have had time to perfect their builds by the time World Slayer came out. Which of course wasn't my case, because I went directly from the ending of the base game to the first mission of the World Slayer. Still, despite being a lot more difficult, I was able to get to about halfway through the World Slayer campaign in my half-assed build, still solo. And yeah, I did die a lot more of course, but I never needed to put down the Apocalypse tier to get through it. And then after the halfway point, I did decide to finally mess around with my build, and that allowed me to get through to the end of the World Slayer campaign, again solo. But then I tried my hand at the endgame activities, expeditions, which lore-wise I was supposed to do before World Slayer campaign, and trials which do come after the World Slayer campaign, and I gotta say I was having a hard time doing those alone. But turning to public matchmaking was impossible. I never found anyone in matchmaking ever. I left it on for over a few hours and was never able to find anyone. Possibly because the amount of people playing the game was so low. But whatever the case, I was never able to get that right. In fact, I was only able to play with other people by joining the Outriders Discord channel, and I mean, it's not a lot of people there either, but there are a few who have maxed out their levels, their Apocalypse tiers, their Ascendance levels and whatnot, that still continue to play almost every day, and some of them are just there to farm stuff, but several of them are there to help newer players out, and I thought that was fantastic. I mean, there was this one guy who was asking me for money if he helped me out in some expeditions, and that was weird, but for the most part, the people that I have played with were incredibly kind. So yeah, my experience with the game was very great. I just wish there were more people playing. So you see, the more I played it, the more I wondered why people quit playing, and the more I felt like this was a huge missed opportunity on both People Can Fly and Square Enix's side. The game felt good enough that had they continued to update and tweak the game, surely it would have gathered a decent amount of players. In fact, most of the so-called Destiny killers seemed like they gave up too quickly, and Outriders was better than most of those games that I had played before. It wasn't until I joined the aforementioned Outriders official Discord that I was informed that the devs never meant Outriders to be a live service game, and that this was why they stopped updating the game, because they had finished the story and the game was finished. So it turns out, Outriders was never meant to compete with games like Destiny to begin with, but was more in line with games like Borderlands and Dead Island. So it made sense that once people did what the game had to offer, they were done with it. And yet, I couldn't help but feel like that wasn't really right. Now, of course, I'm not saying that they are lying to us about Outriders never being meant to be a live service game, but I just meant it was a huge missed potential. Because there's a lot of signs, there were a lot of aspects to the game that would have made it easy to transition into a live service game. Because not only is the endgame activity heavily dependent on having other people play with you, but there are emotes in the game. And yeah, doing emotes to your friends is fun and all, but what other one and done game has emotes? Emotes are mostly a thing for live service games or at least online games, where you aren't only interacting with your one co-op partner, but several people that you come across along the way. And yeah, you unlock several emotes very early on, and you keep unlocking more as you go, but because I played solo, I never actually paid attention to them until one of the people who played trials with me started to use them, and honestly, they're not bad. It seems like there was quite a bit of effort put in to the animation of each of these emotes, right? Another thing is that not only can you personalize your truck with several different parts that you unlock along the way, but your banner. That's right, your banner, which you barely notice when you are playing solo, but you do see it in your lobby. And what is personalization of banners for if not for other players to see? Speaking of things to show other people, transmog. This game has a better transmog system, as in it's not limited at all, than a lot of live service games that I've played. Other games, including Destiny, wants you to pay a specific currency and or material to transmog a single piece of armor. So you do have to keep playing a lot to be able to make items that you already have into transmogs that you can use for later. Not only so, but exotic items cannot be transmogged. Games like New World wants you to spend real money to transmog, while making the in-game drop for the token quite rare, just so that they can say that there is a free-to-play option. But here in Outriders, there's no restriction. Whatever gear you get, you can immediately make that look like whatever other gear that you already picked up at one point or another. Yes, even for weapons. And anyone knows that the true endgame of any live service game is fashion, right? Why else would we collect every piece of gear in a game? Still not convinced? Take a look at how many legendary items there are here. And I say legendary because that's what they're called in this game, but for all intents and purposes, these are like Destiny exotics, in that they have unique perks of their own that are much better than the normal perks you can find in other items. But look at how many there are. This one and done game, this non-live service game, has more legendaries than the first Descendant, and it has more legendaries than Destiny 2 has exotics. Possibly more than both of those games combined. How long has Destiny 2 been around? You can't tell me the devs did not think of having players farming and grinding for these legendaries in expeditions and trials day in and day out. I beat Dead Island 2, the base game, not too long ago, and that game only had 8 legendaries. So you can't tell me that it wasn't planned that they wanted players to be playing this game for a long time. So if the devs wanted this to be a live service game, a lot of the groundwork was already done. So needless to say, though I did already say it like 3 times in this video already, but I really did enjoy this game. And of course it did have its highs, and it definitely did have its lows. There are a few moments in which the game did feel very janky or sometimes even cheap, which is why I think it's such a waste for them not to continue working on this, because though it definitely is not a Destiny killer at the moment, I do think it had all the makings to become one eventually. That said, at the moment, I did everything this game had to offer, except of course collecting all the legendaries in the game, and the few people that I came across that had maxed out everything did say that they do have all the legendaries and that it only takes a few months, but I don't think I will be doing that. Because as much as I love collecting and my channel being entirely about that, I also like feeling a sense of progression in a game and doing new things. And since I did all the activities and story related stuff in this game, and there just being a crazy amount of legendaries to go after, I feel like that would be a very monotonous few months. I don't want to spoil the fun I've had with this game. So yeah, is Outriders worth playing? I think so. At least to play through the campaigns once and playing some of the expeditions and trials if you got one of those elusive creatures known as friends. But even if you were to try all that solo, I do think this is a very decent looter shooter with beautiful graphics and aesthetics, and the tone is definitely a lot darker than most, which is also something I do enjoy quite a bit. So here's to hoping that People Can Fly will eventually announce Outriders 2. So yeah, I had finished editing this video and scheduled it to go out on Saturday, and apparently People Can Fly has announced that Outriders 2 was cancelled. Apparently they have been working on it for a while and it was almost finished even, but they had a falling out with Square Enix. But I mean, it was almost finished, so maybe eventually one day we will get to see it in a different situation. But it seems like for the immediate future, we won't be seeing the sequel, which I guess is a perfectly tragic ending to the tragic story that is Outriders. Well, always hard on.